Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Chief of Staff Show. Today we have Jared Perry joining us, the founder of Flow Chief of Staff. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Melanie. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So let's dive right in. Everyone's always curious, how do you get into a Chief of Staff role? So what was your experience?
Yeah, for sure. For me, my experience came when I was at a seed stage startup. We were basically reorganizing internally. And so that's when the opportunity kind of arose for me to take on the chief of staff role. And so previous to that, I was head of service operations, very much in an operations type role with a couple of people reporting to me. And then the opportunity came to kind of take on some additional hats internally while we hired for some roles. So that's kind of how that came to be.
Yeah, and you were there at that startup for a few years, was it?
Yeah, I was there for about 4 years, bright breaks, and yeah, so about 1 year was as head of service operations, and then chief of staff after that to the CEO and of the organization. So
Yeah. So at a startup, I always say like 1 year is like 7 years, like
yeah.
things move so fast in startups. What was the evolution from when you started your chief of staff role there to when you left? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Just to your point about time going so fast, like it felt like kind of like a time vortex. Like 4 years did really feel like almost felt like 10, right? But the evolution really was when I was first hired. It was during COVID, and at the time, the company was doing basically haircuts in office, so B2B kind of like perks in offices in about like 12 different locations across Canada and the US. And I'm based in Canada. But during the time, no one really knew how long COVID obviously would last and some of the restrictions would last. And so I think within my first couple of weeks there, we decided to make the pivot into launching essentially a brand new business under this business, which was called Bright at the time. And that was offering essentially live fitness and yoga and meditation classes that remote employees could take from their homes, and we would basically stream it out. So, we were doing like 50 live classes a day, like massive scale. And so that was kind of the first evolution, I would say. And kind of basically, it was more like we had a product that we were trying to find customers for versus, having the problem that we're solving first. But eventually we did get closer and closer to product market fit. And the next evolution was a bit of another rebrand and pivot on our services side, which I was still overseeing at this time as chief of staff, which was basically shortening all of our long content into short 7-minute breaks that employees could take during their workday. And so that became kind of the next evolution of the model, and that was the one that started to grow. So a lot of changes in 4 years, and with that, of course, there's a lot of responsibility. Chief of staff would be aligning the team around those. Lots of change management, lots of new operational procedures. Of course, updating all kinds of things with new branding. So that's kind of that's the evolution of how things went there.
Yeah. And that's what's really unique about the chief of staff role. Like your core responsibilities stay the same, but what you're doing is different every day, every quarter, every year, especially
Totally.
in a startup that's pivoting so much. So that's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
And so with that role, you were promoted internally. Was it something that you sought out, or was it something that they had a need and they reached out to you and tapped you for that chief of staff promotion?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, I would say. Like, saw the opportunity for a change in role. So I guess I basically saw the opportunity for role or scope expansion of my current role, and I saw some opportunities of other things that needed to be done, and had the discussion with my CEO at the time, and actually he was the one who had suggested the chief of staff role. I hadn't heard of it before, and I thought it was neat. And I think one of the challenges with it is like you have to kind of figure it out as you go. I guess it can be very ambiguous, and so yeah, that's how it went for me. Is it was kind of a little bit of both. Like there was a need on both sides, and it was a good fit at the time for some of the changes that we were going through.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you're definitely right. There's so much ambiguity in the chief of staff role. But I always say, like, that can be a really big plus because you're filling in the gaps. And so it doesn't work for some people. Some people hate the ambiguity. They're like, no, like, tell me what I need to do and I will do it. But I always say, like, chiefs of staff, we're not just problem solvers, we're also problem seekers. So we kind of see, like, okay, we look at this ambiguity and say, where can I plug in? where can I fill a gap? How can I help out? And just get things done. So it sounds like that was definitely the role that you were taking, just getting the things done.
Exactly. Yeah, getting the things done, and just to your point there, I do like the challenges that arise and the variety of challenges that we deal with in the role.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about how you've now taken on the fractional chief of staff space. And so you're running Flow Chief of Staff, and we hear so much about fractional as the future. A lot of people's professions are moving fractional. That's the way that people like to work. It's the way that companies, especially early stage, like to hire. How did you get into the fractional space, Jerry?
Yeah, great question. So I left my role at Bright Breaks back in, I think it was around April, and I just had a bit of time to kind of think about my next steps, and this had been on my mind, kind of this fractional role. And for me, it was kind of just about connecting the dots between what you exactly just mentioned there, Melanie, of the startups can use some expertise or just some hands-on experience, but they might not need the overhead costs of a full-time employee. And so that's kind of what the what I had seen, and yeah, basically what I wanted to test out.
Yeah, so being sort of like a pioneer in that space, because there's not a lot of fractional chiefs of staff yet, but those of us that are in the industry, we can tell, like, yes, this is definitely needed. There's just, the other layer of increasing awareness on the other side that
Hmm.
they realize that they need it, right? What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a couple main ones. The first one is the chief of staff role itself can be ambiguous. Um, there's first kind of like it's pretty. I don't want to say it's a lot simpler to maybe be able to explain what a CMO does or a COO or something that has like a really defined role. So there's that. There's kind of like a positioning piece around that, and it was actually still is a bit of a challenge for me is to figure that out because there's a little bit of education, as you'd know, that kind of goes along with what the role is. And so a way to that I've kind of overcome that is seeking out founders who have worked with chief of staffs before. That's been helpful, and the other way is just like explaining it to others who haven't. So that's kind of the one side, and then there's the other piece I think is around there might be a bit of a mentality around if someone isn't on the team full time or in the office with you, that you might not be able to get as much out of them, or they might not be able to contribute, or you might not have the same amount of trust as you would with someone who you're going to see all the time or who is a full-time employee. That's kind of been another challenge, and just kind of navigating that positioning. But once again, there's plenty of companies out there who are fully remote, who, like you said earlier, work with fractional part-time people all the time. And I think it's more about, I think the way to overcome that challenge is finding more companies like that really kind of fit that mold.
Yeah. And you made a good point about how certain roles are so easy to describe and define. The chief of staff role, we have such an often intangible impact. And so it's so important like that you're documenting your wins. I think probably even more so like in a fractional um, setting because you want to be able to really clearly clarify and quantify the impact that you've made. And so how does that sort of play out with your work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think the fractional or kind of limited time does lend itself well in this regard, because it kind of forces me to work on high value items or higher value items than if I was a full time hire, which is also a benefit to the startups I would work with. So yeah, just take that a step further. I think it's more about leading those initiatives that are going to have a lot more business value or drive a lot more value for the business. And a simple example of that would be leading OKRs or other strategy, like supporting the founder and rolling out strategy, and kind of some of those other cross-functional projects that are of high importance and high value that the company needs. And because a fractional person's time is a little bit more limited, it kind of really forces to focus on those really key projects and making sure those are getting done versus something that might be a little bit lower priority.
That's a really good point that I hadn't considered previously. When someone's
Mm-hmm.
fractional, because their time is so limited, they're kind of forced to have to focus on what is the highest priority thing. And as you know, like being a chief of staff, prioritization is so valuable to your work, to the company that you're working for. So that's a really good call out that fractional chiefs of staff can be a little bit more effective in just focusing on like what has to be done as
Hmm.
opposed to, sometimes when we're working full time, we have maybe more of a luxury of like getting into the weeds or, checking out other things. Whereas a fractional chief of staff is like, this is what we have to get done and we have this much time. So run with it.
Totally. Yep. I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And so do you have any like thoughts for companies that are interested in bringing on a fractional chief of staff? What do you suggest to them?
Yeah, I think it's a good. So first, I think the fractional, like, I think it's good for a few reasons, I would say. I think it's especially good for maybe companies who are curious about hiring a chief of staff, right? So it could be a really great way to kind of dip your toes in the water. That's one thing I would say. So you could kind of get started. If the relationship grows between the business and the chief of staff, well, then maybe you can scale it up. Maybe it gets to a point where you need someone full time, and then at that point you can have a conversation with, whether you're going to join or whatever. There's benefits obviously to a fractional person that way, or the other side of it too is to get them set up with a bit of a playbook so that when they go to hire their chief of staff, they've had someone internally who's kind of worked with them on that a bit, and then quite frankly, the fractional chief of staff that's working with them could support them with their search, right, or play some sort of role in that search and the transition of getting them ramped up and up to speed. So yeah, I think that's a good part of it. I think the other one is like with startups and especially optimistic CEOs and founders, they might expect for growth to come a lot sooner than it does actually come. And so I think that is the other play here is you can have a little bit more flexibility with a fractional chief of staff that comes in on a less than a full-time basis. And once again, like I mentioned before, ramping up as the company grows and as you get closer to, say you're at seed, as you get closer to Series A, that might make sense in that sense as well without having to carry the full-time cost of someone, right? Once again, kind of coming back to the philosophy of like hiring when you absolutely need it versus like hiring before you've ramped up, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think too, so you mentioned those sort of like overly eager CEOs and they have these great big visions and short timelines. Expectation management is it's a key part for any chief of staff. When you're starting a chief of staff job, like you've got to have really clear expectations aligned, like, right, like what's going to happen the first 30, 60, 90 days. I imagine in a fractional setting, those expectations have to be even clearer. What have you run into with that? Because, they might expect you to be a magician, but, with working fewer hours, how does that play out?
Yeah, I think it's just so it's played out in a couple ways, and this is something I'm still learning and trying to fine tune myself. So I'm very much my own startup, trying to find product market fit as I go. But a couple ways I've really solved this is like upfront, just kind of getting clear on what the founder really needs help with, and just kind of like mapping out like what that looks like in terms of the way I might think about it is how much time is that going to take me in a week. So that's one. Not that, and I don't really want to get down the rabbit hole of billing for hours, but more about the value that it brings to the business is my main focus on that. But just making sure it's pretty clear up front of what exactly will we be accomplishing to get like working together. Um, the nice thing about the engagements too is I set them up so there's always a regular touch point, whether it's a weekly check-in typically is the main one, or at least a couple quick syncs during the week just to get aligned. And those are great touch points too, just to be realigned on those things. Yeah, and then the other one I would say is like the nice thing about working on the strategy with some businesses is that I also get to kind of select, or not select, I shouldn't say, but I can map. We can kind of map out some of the things where I will allocate my time and help out, right? So we can kind of look down the future and see what some of those key projects are that I might be supporting with. So there's a couple main ways, and I think it's just like setting expectations and then making sure that they're kind of realigned as you go. And I think it's also important to, the other thing that I've noticed is it's important to have communication on both sides. That's you can't just have it on one way or the other, and it's important to have it going both ways.
Yeah. Alignment and communication are just critical, really for any role, but
Mm-hmm.
especially for the chief of staff. Do you have any advice for current or aspiring chiefs of staff who might be interested either in the role in general, since you've been a chief of staff for 4 years at a startup or in the fractional
Mm-hmm.
space? Any advice that you might give someone who's interested in the role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few ways you could look at it, I guess. The way I would kind of tend to look at this is I'd look at the job descriptions that are out there for chiefs of staff, and I would probably look at my own gaps. So say there's a role out there and I've never led OKRs or strategy or something like that, then I would like read up about that. I would read up about it, learn about it, and then I would pitch a startup to see if I could facilitate it for them for free or something like that to get the experience. That's one way to do it. That's obviously assuming that you have not a lot of free time, but you have some extra time. But that is also how when I got started with Flowcoast, is that's Flow Chief of Staff. That's how I got started as well, was just by pitching. I pitched a few different founders on working with them on some specific projects. Once again, it was a very casted a wide net and tried to figure out what problems could they be facing right now. And that's how I got my first several testimonials, and then my first couple of clients was just working with them, because that was the main resource I had, was some extra time. And so I think, and I always obviously think very much as from a startup perspective, but yeah, just be scrappy about it, right? And if you want to work at a startup and be a chief of staff, then just start doing some of those things, start taking those things on. And if you're not sure, just start doing the work and finding people that are willing to work with you and kind of give you the feedback along the way as you go. Yeah, that's how. And I know everyone's different, so obviously I'm making some assumptions there that people have free time, that kind of thing. But that is straight up how I just how I did build my most recent business. Now, of course, I was in the role for a few years before that, which helped, but to get my first clients, that's what I did. We just kind of rolled up my sleeves and pitched myself as a solution for some of the problems, and it worked. So others can do it too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. I'm a huge like proponent of pitching yourself for a role, especially chief of staff. A lot of times, a company, they know they need developers, they know they need salespeople, they know they need an EA, they have that sort of understanding,
Hmm.
but they don't yet realize how much they need a chief of staff. And so it's a great
Hmm.
opportunity, if you're a current chief of staff, if you want to become one, to sort of pitch them. And I love like asking, hey, what are the challenges you're facing? What are the problems? And then pitching yourself as the solution. So I love that you've taken it one step further to say, if you're able to do some of the work,
Yeah.
show them how your solutions work out in real life and kind of go from there.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if, if there's anyone out there who's like a recent grad or who is in a career transition point, then it's a great opportunity to join an early stage startup, somewhere like that, where you're the, I don't know, communications manager, but really you're also like three other things at the same time, right? Like that is effectively kind of a stepping stone, or getting towards wearing multiple hats, and then closer to a chief of staff type of role, getting that experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jared, you're a chief of staff, but you're also an entrepreneur. And I like to tell people that, if you want to be an entrepreneur one day, if you see yourself being a CEO or a founder sometime in the future, the chief of staff role is a really great launch pad, because you're working with a CEO
Hmm.
or a founder, you're shoulder to shoulder with them, seeing across the entire org how decisions are made, why decisions are made. You learn so much. It's a really great training ground. In your experience, how did that chief of staff role that you had prepare you to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say for me, and I'm still learning on this too, right? With each, it's great because one of the things I mentioned earlier is with each founder that I work with, I get to see how they do things, which are things I can apply to my own business or apply to clients' businesses potentially as well, right? But yeah, for me, I think it really kind of opened my eyes to moving quickly. So how quickly you need to move, how ruthlessly, quite frankly, you need to prioritize, especially when you're small. Spending time on the wrong things can sink a company so quickly. Like if you're building the wrong features or you don't have enough validation in something and you spend months doing something, you're just going to waste money. And it kind of honestly, even more so as someone who's gone out solo, like you really have to be thinking and strategic with your time. So I think it really helped me kind of crystallize like different strategies. I would say would be one thing. The other is like, yeah, moving quickly, getting everyone aligned, all things that help me with my own business. And then once again, like I would say kind of systems and operations wise, it's obviously really helpful to see how all those things can work together for your own business as well, right? And how you can optimize things and automate some things. You're not spending too much time on tasks that could be, that you don't need to be doing.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Well, Jared, I really appreciate your time and you sharing your thoughts, your insights, your experience. Is there anything you want to share before we part ways?
I would just say, yeah, like the chief of staff role is great for those who really like it. And I think, like we said earlier, Melanie, it's really great for folks who are looking for more of a general career path and who like to see different problems and like to problem solve. So yeah, I would say if anyone's out there on the fence or is looking at doing it, it's great. And yeah, good luck with your.
Thank you, Jared. That's awesome. Is there anywhere people can find you? Maybe their company's looking for a fractional chief of staff. Where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So my URL is the Jared Perry on LinkedIn. So I'm on there. My profile picture, I have much shorter hair, so that might throw you a bit. And the other one is my website is flowcoast.com. So FLOWCOS or flowchiefofstaff.com. So you can find me there.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'll drop those links in the comments as well. Thank you for your time,
Perfect.
Jared.
Thanks so much.